August of 75, this amazing sound just came out of the radio, and it was everywhere. And I had never heard of Bruce before then, before Born to Run came out, and all of a sudden it was everywhere. And the first time you hear that song as a teenager, even, you got to pay attention.
Yeah.
And it's went down to the record store. I think at that point I was shopping at Peach's Record Store in Fort Lauderdale,
Okay.
where you would go and you would hang out all day and just thumb through the racks of albums, and picked up Born to Run and listened to it straight through. And it's, wow, that's a tough album to beat.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. I've got my new friend, Richard Harrison, here. We are recording just a few days after we got the word that the tour is postponed for the rest of the year. I had tickets for Columbus, I had tickets for Phoenix, and I am really glad that Bruce is getting the help and health and healing that he needs, but I was a little disappointed. Any thoughts on that, Richard?
As we all are, when you invited me to join you, I said,
Yeah.
let's put the date off a little bit because I got tickets for Albany. We were going
Yeah.
to fly up to Albany. And there goes that plan.
Yeah.
But we'll get the rescheduled date and we'll put it on the calendar. And what do you do? Look, Bruce is a few years older than me, maybe more than a few. You got to take care of yourself, and everybody wants him to get well, and he'll be back.
Yeah.
But it's disappointing. It's disruptive. You make plans, you're looking forward to it. Can I tell you a great story about why I had tickets for Albany?
Sure. Please. I'd love it.
The tour opened here in Tampa,
Yeah.
and we went to opening night, had a great time. My girlfriend, I would say, was a casual Bruce fan. Had a great time. Me being the guy I am, I also managed to get us tickets for the Orlando show 5 nights later. So we went to the Orlando show, and we're driving back the next day. And my lovely girlfriend looks over as I'm driving and says, I know he's getting older, and I hear all this talk about whether this might be the last tour. And I really had a lot of fun, and it's a great show. And if you want to go to another show, I would go with you. And I think it took me all of 30 minutes when we got home to get on the computer and book Albany.
Yeah. My wife is a casual fan. I think we went to our first one when he was here in Dallas back in 2002, and she didn't particularly care for it because it was the Rising tour. She didn't know any of the songs. She was just okay. And then in 2012, we went up to Cleveland to see him. It was our Bruce and Bourbon tour. We also did the Kentucky Bourbon Trail on the way up there and the way down. And she really loves Wrecking Ball as an album. She enjoyed it more. And then we saw him later that year in Louisville, and she went to two shows with me on this. She went to Dallas and she went to Houston. And she was looking forward to. We ended up having tickets for Tulsa, but I got COVID and couldn't go. She liked the tour. She was really happy with it. She goes, I know that there's a little bit of noise. She goes, and I was a little surprised that the set list didn't change. That was one of the reasons why I was willing to go to more than one show. But she goes, but that's a pretty good show. I'd go see that again anytime.
Yeah, I guess we should probably talk about the set list because a lot of
Yeah.
people seem unhappy about it. And I said, we saw the show twice in the space of 5 nights, and it was basically the same show. There might have been one song different between
Yeah.
Tampa and Orlando. But so what? This is not complicated for me. Any night with live Springsteen is better than any night without.
Yeah, the old joke is even a bad day in the ballpark is better than a good day in the office. Though I will tell you, a day game in July at the old bar park in Arlington that had no roof, it was close. It was close. It was like 101. You're like, okay, maybe it'd be better to be in the office with some air conditioning. But yeah, I'm very happy. Yeah, and I want to talk about the opening night in Tampa because you guys got some songs that as the tour changed, we didn't get. So I want to talk about that, but let's go back to the beginning. First off, Richard, I didn't give you an official chance to tell us a little about yourself.
Oh, talk about myself, you say. Okay,
Please.
please. I'm a lawyer here in Tampa. Been lawyering for about 36 years. So basically my whole adult life I've lived in Tampa. But I was born in Astoria, New York in 1960. My mom was Italian, my dad was Irish, so our household was actually a lot like Bruce's household with a lot of that same dynamic. Grew up in New York till I was about 8 or 9 years old, and then family relocated to South Florida. And after that, I just stayed. Growing up, I remember the earliest music I remember growing up was playing my mother's old 45s of the old Italian folk singers.
Yeah.
Um, and she had boxes and boxes of them. And of course, a lot of Sinatra, a lot of Tony Bennett was a neighbor who grew up in our neighborhood. And celebrities were very different then. Celebrity itself was very different then. People didn't walk around with an entourage, they were just normal people. And yeah, so it's interesting the stuff you remember when you start talking about kind of what's the earliest music you remember hearing? And it was that. Like every good son of an Italian mother, I took accordion lessons for about 6 or 7 years.
Wow, that's a long time, Richard.
Yes, way past, I will say, way past the point at which it should have been apparent to everyone that I have no musical talent, way past it. And so I eventually gave up on that. My mother, God bless her, I was a very small, scrawny kid. And you start out with a kid's version of an accordion, which is a very compact thing. But it's got fewer buttons, fewer keys. It's shrunk down. I guess I was good enough that I progressed past the kids version. And so my instructor wanted me to have a full size accordion, which the first time I put on a full size accordion, it practically toppled me over because I couldn't hold it up. So my parents we were very working class folks. We were not wealthy by any means. Somehow my mother, and I still don't know how she ever pulled it off, managed to send to Italy for a custom made mid-sized accordion.
Wow.
Which I know had to be an enormous investment for them of money they probably could have done a lot of other things with. And sadly, it did not help my playing.
So does the Wish have a special place in your heart with her working for that accordion?
Yeah, and funny when we hear Bruce sing about his mother and working at the title company. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for much of my youth, but also I remember while we were in New York, she was a bank teller, worked in a bank. And I remember again, back then, you got dressed up to go to work. The ladies got
Yeah.
dressed up to go to work. And even folks that didn't necessarily have a lot of money, you got dressed up to go to work. That was part of who you were, part of your image, your self-respect. And it was what was expected. So yeah, that song, hearing Bruce talk about his mom resonates with me. Hearing Bruce talk about his dad resonates with me. I gotta say, my father was not an alcoholic. He was not abusive ever. But some of the struggles that Bruce talks about in communicating with his father, I share that and live through that. And yeah, when we went to see him on Broadway, it was like, oh my God, I was in tears. It was like therapy.
Richard, I've told this story before, but I was listening to The Wish and I was just crying. And so I realized that I still had my mom was still here, right? So I called her and I was trying to explain to her about this song and about this. And it was like, what, Jesse Wayne? I don't understand. And I just end up giving up and just talking to her. My father had a few of the traits. He struggled with alcoholism, though most of my life, I remember he was, if not officially in recovery, not someone who did. But there was a joke, and we, with a lot of affection, and I mentioned this at his funeral, that you would call him and you'd look at the end like, oh, 4 minutes. Dad was in a talkative mood. He loved you calling. He
Right.
loved the idea that you called him and that you wanted to check on him, but then that was enough, right? Are you okay? Yes, I'm good.
I think that generation of men
Yeah.
were not raised to be big talkers and big sharers of feelings. You went to work, you earned a living, you supported your family. I don't ever remember my father not having two jobs, and I remember times when he had three jobs because that's what you did.
Yeah. And my father, career military, I'm a year older than you. I was born in 59. So we are at that same generation where I absolutely get that. Can you remember when you first heard Bruce and what about his music spoke to you?
I do remember, and I'm guessing you've heard this answer before. It was August of 1975. So I was, by that point, a 14-year-old guy growing up in South Florida. And let's just say my group of friends at that time, we were all doing things that teenagers did in the 70s in South Florida. And we'll just leave it at that.
Fair
Uh,
enough.
but August of 75, this amazing sound just came out of the radio, and it was everywhere. And I had never heard of Bruce before then, before Born to Run came out, and all of a sudden it was everywhere. And the first time you hear that song as a teenager, even, you got to pay attention.
Yeah.
And it's, oh, went down to the record store. I think at that point I was shopping at Peach's Record Store in Fort Lauderdale,
Okay.
where you would go and you would hang out all day and just thumb through the racks of albums, and picked up Born to Run and listened to it straight through. And it's, wow, that's a tough album to beat.
Richard, I just recently sent an email to a TV critic asking him because he was talking about how much he loved the TV series on Hulu, Reservation Dogs. And he said what strikes him is he loves things that are unique yet universal. He says this is a unique series. It is written by Native Americans. It's filmed in Oklahoma, reservation in Oklahoma, Native American cast, Native American creative team, yet their themes are universal. And I watched the first two or three episodes and I sent back a letter saying, it doesn't matter if you're a town in southern Florida, small town in Louisiana, town in New Jersey, or a reservation in Oklahoma. We got to get out while we're young. That we need that feeling of I've got to get out of here. And that is universal. I think back of the scene Blinded by the Light where the dad at the end says, I think this guy is Pakistani because the themes are so universal.
Yeah, it's really true. And if that weren't true, we wouldn't be listening to Bruce for 50 years and still going to sold out shows all over the world.
Yeah.
There's got to be something there that affects people on a very basic but very common level.
Yes. Do So I always like to preface, you've already talked about going to a couple of shows, but the amount of shows you have seen is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. I've been lucky enough, Richard, to have people on the show that have never seen him live. And then I've had people who are, because they went to high school and college in the 70s, have seen him hundreds of times. But do you count how many shows you've gone to?
I don't count. I'm not in the hundreds. I think I'm up to 9 or 10.
Okay.
But I've always enjoyed live music. I've lost another one of my heroes recently when Jimmy Buffett passed, and I still have the first concert ticket that I ever saw Buffett was my first concert ever in Miami, and the ticket price was $6.50.
I we've we are reaching the age where we are starting to lose our musical heroes. Tom Petty and Prince and John Prine. But when I heard that we had lost Buffett, I actually did a little mini editorial that we had tickets when Linda was pregnant in 1989. She was sick. She couldn't go. And we never took time to go see him again. It's a bad weekend. And as I said, we thought always be another summer. There'd always be another tour. And now then I won't get that chance. And I was really sad because it seems someone who, and there is a great interview where he talks about he makes breakfast the way Bruce makes breakfast. And he says, we're all the same. We're just pancake makers. He just seemed to get it and to not only love life, but love making music,
Yeah.
right? He just made music because I love making it.
Yeah, I saw him. We saw him here in Tampa last year, and I don't count Buffett shows either, but
Yeah.
the number's higher. And came away from that show. It was a great show, right? You go, you have fun. Came away. I was a little bit disappointed. I felt, the show is a little short. Maybe that's just because I've seen him so many times, whatever.
Yeah.
And of course, what we didn't know at the time was that he knew he was dying. And imagine knowing that and still getting up and doing what you love and entertaining other people.
It brings a little bit of tear to my eye, right?
Yeah.
That he knew that and kept it private and was still out there. There's been a lot of noise about how good those last 3 shows at the MetLife Stadium was for Bruce on this tour. And they go, and now retroactively knowing that he was sick enough, wow, how much was he pushing through that to give us this last gift till 2024?
Yeah. And you never know what somebody's dealing with, even when they're somebody famous. And
Yeah.
if I can do what I love doing up until the last minute, then that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, it really would be. So I want to get to Tampa, but before that, are there other shows that stand out from you? You obviously mentioned Broadway, that I think everyone who was lucky enough to go, I was lucky enough to get a ticket. Just, it was a special night. But any other shows that you want to share a story about?
I saw, we'll talk about Tampa 2012 in a bit.
Yes.
And the Rising tour, of course, was spectacular for lots of different and unique reasons. Musically, it's a spectacular collection of work, but it's something more than that. I think it's always going to be recognized as something more than that. I've been listening to music for as long as I can remember, and I cannot think off the top of my head of any album that you would look at and say was more historically compelling at the moment it came out.
The story is that someone said, "We need you, Bruce," and we really did. And especially that when you realize some of those songs were not directly inspired by the 9/11 tragedy. Yeah, it is. That was my first live show. And it was, I casually knew The Rising. I was a casual fan. And in fact, someone just on Twitter said, "Hey, if you could go back and see any show anytime." And I said, "There's a lot I'd love to see, but I'd love to go back to that first one, that's The Rising, with these experienced ears, right? With the idea of, oh man, now knowing what all that's going to go to hear that number." Yeah. So, yeah, let's talk about Tampa's had some good shows over the years.
Tampa has been blessed. Bruce has a little bit of a connection with Tampa through his equestrian daughter.
Okay.
For many years, Tampa hosted one of the Olympic qualifying events. And
I did not realize that.
yes, and he would visit periodically. So there's a little bit of a connection. And it seems, at least for the last several US tours, we're always on the front leg. We're always on the front end. This year we got really lucky, got to open the tour, which itself was spectacular. It really was. So yeah, it's always nice when he comes through town, and we always seem to get a really good show.
Yeah, and one of the things that I bought this on the Nugs because he started changing it. He dropped the other Soul cover. He's not doing Burning Train, which I really was on my list to see. Though I'm not going to complain. At and Houston and Austin, he both did If I Was the Priest. So I feel like I got bingo. Like I'm
Yeah.
not going to complain. I'm not going to be too greedy. You've talked a little bit already. Your lovely girlfriend was enjoying the show. Did Obviously a live Bruce show always meets expectations, but any initial thoughts that when you go like this guy hasn't lost the step or anything like that you want to share?
The Tampa show was really interesting. I think nobody really knew what to expect, right? It had been a while
Yeah,
between COVID and Broadway. It'd been a while. And Bruce is loved wherever he goes, but every city wants to think they're special. We're delighted that he chose here to open and came out, opened with No Surrender, which sort of surprised everybody, and just started blowing through songs. And when we were about 6 songs in, and I remember thinking to myself, he hasn't said a word. There's been no talk, no chatter, nothing. Uh, and I think we got to 11 or 12 songs before he ever stopped and said anything. And I'm like, what is going on here? It was, I don't know if it was a bit of nervousness after not touring for a
yeah.
while, or if it was some kind of sense of urgency. It came across as a sense of urgency. I have a message that I am trying to get out at this moment in time, and I don't have a lot of time to chit chat. And I ended up after the show, couldn't sleep, of course.
Yeah.
And I think it was about 2 in the morning after we got home. I wrote a big long tweet and I said, we should just call this the No Time for Small Talk tour.
I
And
remember reading that tweet. That is awesome.
yeah, and I think it's held up pretty well. It's because we all love the music, but I particularly enjoy the storytelling. A big part of my job as a trial lawyer is telling stories. I read, I write. I've always been a writer, and when somebody can tell a story, even like Broadway, when somebody can tell a story that they told the night before and they told it last week, and it's scripted, he's not up there making
Yeah.
it up new every night, and still have it come across with that genuineness and make a connection with a group of several hundred strangers in the audience. That's really a remarkable skill. And it's not easy to do, I will tell you.
I just heard, I think it was on the E Street Cafe podcast that one of their guests says, I miss Bruce talking to us. And that is, I remember my first couple of shows. I remember the parody of Saturday Night Live talking about you can buy just the banter, right? Like you could get an album of just Bruce talking. And it has gotten less and less. And he certainly is very emotional when he talks about the band, the Castiles. And then ending, I'll see you in my dreams, is very emotional. But I Chris and I did a talk. My son is Chris, and he went during the second river tour with me to Oklahoma City. Never seen Bruce before, not really a Bruce fan, just going because dad wants to go.
Right.
And so we're in the car driving home the next morning, and he said, Bruce doesn't play. Like, you got to be ready because the moment a song ends, he's counting down the next one. And I go, yeah. He also said that he wishes the Cowboy receivers would catch as good as Bruce's guitar techs when he's throwing the guitar up. But I joked, and I think very few people, but a few people If so, God, he didn't even hit 3 hours anymore. And I said, if you added a minute between every song, just a minute for them to, because often when you hear like the old live sets, the Nugs or something, there'll be that list. So if you have just doing this, that would add a 30 or 45 minutes to the show. It just, I think you said it perfect. No time for small talk. I'm here. I've got a message to tell you. I've got rock and roll to play. I am here to give you, to uplift your spirits. 1, 2, 3, go.
Yeah, and off you go, and it's like you just got on a bullet train, and 3 hours later, you're exhausted and happy, and it's wonderful.
There's been talk for a long time, and I hope someday they do it, to get a bullet train between Houston and Dallas where you could just do a high speed. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. You go, no stop, let's roll. Here we go. You did mention on Twitter that you you tweeted the set list and said, I have a story about this. So please tell me what was the story behind that?
Oh, this is Tampa, March of 2012.
Okay.
So this is Wrecking Ball Tour,
Yes.
which I think is starting to become more and more appreciated as an album than it was maybe when it first came out. Lots of good music on there, but I was in the middle of a very long, enormous trial here in federal court in Tampa. Trial went for over a month.
Wow.
I had an army of lawyers working under me, engineers, consultants, experts, whatever. Because the trial was going to be that long, the judge said at the beginning, we are going to take Fridays off. So we know we're going 4, 5, possibly 6 weeks. We're not going to work on Friday. I got to give the jury a break. Great. Turns out the concert was on Thursday night. So I'm going. Problem is, I got all these people that are working for me. And when you're in trial, you're in court all day and then you working pretty much into the night to get ready for the next day. You can't just disappear. So what am I going to do? I can't just disappear. So I decided the way to solve my problem, and I thought it was brilliant at the time, was I would buy a suite at the arena, invite some of my colleagues, invite my experts who were here from out of town, and that way nobody would wonder where I was and did I abandon the team, right? So that's what we did. So I've got a suite. I want to be a good host. This is back then, yeah, it was already Amalie Arena. So I've got a suite for, I don't know, 20 or 24 people, and we are at the opposite end of the arena, directly facing the stage. So I want to get there first. I don't want my guests to show up and have it empty. So I took my two daughters, who were then about 13 and 19, big Bruce fans because I raised them properly. And so I went first. So my kids, we're going first. We're going to get there early. We're going to be good hosts. Show up, park the car, walk in, go to the special entrance for the suites. Some young kid scans our tickets, points us at the elevator, up we go. No problem. Get to our suite, the door's unlocked, we walk in. We're there a couple of minutes, and then the caterers come in, they're starting to set up and do what they do. And there's nobody there, which is what I intended. So we're just hanging out. My kids are looking around, and I start realizing that there's nobody else in the arena. And when I say nobody else, there's nobody on the floor, there's nobody in the seats, and I'm looking around at suite level, and there's nobody in any of the other suites either.
Ooh.
And I start thinking to myself, this is a little odd. And so then a couple of my guests start showing up, and they're letting people come up. First couple of guys come in, and I'm talking business. My kids are watching the activity on the stage, and all of a sudden, there's activity. And my daughter, the young daughter, who was 12 or 13 at the time, comes over and tugs on my coat and, Daddy, it's Bruce. It's not Bruce. Probably just some roadie doing something. No, it's Bruce. Nah, go away, kid. She goes back, comes back a few minutes later. Daddy, it's Bruce. And I'm like, it's not Bruce. Just I'm talking business. She goes away, comes back a third time, tugs on my arm, Says, Daddy, I know Bruce Springsteen, and that is Bruce Springsteen on stage, and you better come look. And about the time she blurts that out, I hear the opening chords of 41 Shots. And you cannot mistake that opening.
Sure.
And this was not long after the Trayvon Martin incident, so he was playing 41 Shots. And I realized, holy crap, it's sound check. And there's nobody in here. And I'm pretty sure we're not supposed to be in here yet. And so they run through 41 shots, and my two girls are the only people in the stands at this point, start clapping and woo-hooing. And Bruce looks up and waves at him and says, how's the sound up there, girls? And they're woo-hooing. And it was spectacular. And I told my daughters, I was divorced by then from their mother, I said, you go home and you tell your mother that you had a private moment with Bruce Springsteen. And it was just great. And about that time, some security guy shows up in the suite to tell us that it was all a mistake. We weren't supposed to be there. They shouldn't have let us in and on. It starts giving us a hard time. But now I got people actually showing up. And I'm like, look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't do anything wrong. You let us in.
Yeah.
And just getting a little cantankerous. And I said, look, you're going to have to go probably get your boss to come talk to me about this. And in the meantime, I've been a Lightning season ticket holder for about 20 years at that point. I quick called up my customer service guy and said, look, here's what's going on. By the time they got back with security, the Lightning team was there and they worked it all out and nobody threw us out and we got to stay. But yeah, it was crazy because it really dawned on me at that moment. Yeah, we're probably not supposed to be in here.
And to be fair, if they had said, I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, it's too early, we can't let you in now. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm here well and figure out my guests. But yes,
Right.
once you let me in, this kind of, okay, let's think about this for a minute. You're going to make us all leave, get into a queue and wait 20, 30 minutes, maybe 45 to bring us back in. That just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, we got it worked out, but that was a fun experience all around, other than the brief moment of trepidation, realizing probably we weren't supposed to be there at that moment. But that was fun. And then everybody ended up having a great time, of course.
Richard, I joke about, and there's some seriousness in this. There is a lot of joy watching your child do well at sports. And there is joy in watching your child graduate high school, graduate college. But there really is very few moments of pride as much when my son ended up getting hired for the same company I worked for. And people would come up and say, is Chris Jackson your son? Yes. We don't talk a lot about it, but yes. Let me tell you, he's sharp. That's a good kid. And I said, forget it. There's wonderful watching them play well at sports, but to have someone in a business say, you should be proud, that's a good moment. Having your daughter say, look, old man, I know who Bruce Springsteen is. Get your butt over here right now. Must have been a moment of pride once you got past that.
Yes, it was a moment of immense pride. I remember thinking to myself, my work here is done and the future is in good hands. And yeah, it was spectacular. I was blessed to have two beautiful daughters. And from the minute they were born, they both were going to learn two very important cultural things, sports and music. And beyond that, whatever you want to do with your life is wonderful. I don't have a lot of rules. Find something you're passionate about, something you can earn a living doing, and hopefully it's something that makes some greater contribution to our society. Those are my rules. But I don't care. There's a lot of choices there. But it's still largely a man's world. And whatever you go into, you need to be able to relate to everybody, and you need to be able to talk about culture and society and history and art and music and sports. I say, I got the music and sports covered. So yeah, when my 12 or 13-year-old daughter stomps her little foot and says, I know who Bruce Springsteen is. Yeah, that was a proud papa moment.
Yeah, I gotta imagine that. Um, so Richard, are there songs on your wish list that you still wish you want to see live? Are there a couple songs you're still chasing?
No, I know a lot of people talk about that, and gee, I wish I just really want to hear this
Yeah,
song. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the songs I haven't heard or he hasn't played because I'd rather spend my time enjoying the songs I'm hearing. If you put me on the spot, which you have, so I'll give you an answer. I will say this: we talked about the Rising a few minutes ago.
yeah,
Into the Fire has always
yeah,
had a special meaning for me growing up in New York. And my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was a New York City firefighter. I never met
sure.
him. He died at a very young age. My dad was only about 16 when he lost his father.
Mm,
But we all remember the video and we've all seen the documentaries. And
sure.
to literally sit there and watch those guys running up the stairs into the fire when every human instinct tells you should be running away is spectacular. And
Yeah, it really
um,
is, isn't it?
it is utterly unnatural. It has got to be the most selfless thing a person could do. And not only running up the stairs, but literally having to fight your way past all the people that are terrified coming down the stairs. Makes me think of my grandfather that I never met. I have his 1930s or 40s vintage old crackled leather fire helmet hanging on my wall in my office at home.
That's nice.
So yeah, that song. Whenever that song comes on, I got to stop what I'm doing for a minute and give it a listen. It's a simple song. It's not musically complicated. Tells an amazing story in just a couple of minutes. It's powerful, and it's made more powerful because we've all seen those videos and those documentaries, and we all know that story. It's not in that case. It's not just an allegory. We witnessed it. We saw it.
Yeah. Because my first show was the Rising tour, the only song he's played every time I've seen him, and I'm at 19 shows now, is The Rising. Because when he didn't do Born to Run on the Devils and Dust when I was there. There's others he didn't do, but so far every show I've seen is The Rising, which is not a bad song to hear every time. It's not one I get tired of. Yeah, that's wonderful. All right, I'm going to get to the Mary question, but any other thoughts or anything I should have asked you, Richard, that I haven't, that I should have?
No, I've enjoyed chatting. I think we've covered a lot of ground. It's one more quick story if you got time.
Always.
I told you about my brief foray into becoming an accordion aficionado, which I utterly failed at. But many years later, while my parents were still alive, they both passed a few years ago, but they were visiting well in their 80s by that point. And look, it's a little hard to entertain your 80 something year old parents all day long in the house, right? So
Yeah.
I had just picked up a DVD, and I think it was maybe one of the Wembley shows, big stadium show. And I'm putting it on, and they're playing in the background, and my mom's watching. And all of a sudden, the moment I look over, she's pointing screen. And I look and I froze it. Lo and behold, there's not just one guy playing the accordion, but there was two guys on stage playing the accordion. And my mother's, see, I told you, you should have stuck with it.
That's right. You could be Bruce's official accordion.
That could have been me. That could have been
Yeah,
me.
I could have been a contender. Oh, I love that story so much. That is great. I wonderful. I do love when Charlie pulls out the accordion and when they had the Western Stars film, they
Right.
did that. And then one of my favorite that I've never seen live is I went to McNeese State University in Louisiana, and Jolie Blanc is their fight song. So anytime he covers Jolie Blanc, being from Louisiana, I feel
Oh
this.
yeah.
So that would be pretty cool. That's great. Yeah, I was a little surprised Bruce didn't do a Buffett song, but I think that's just not what the tour is. But
Yeah.
I'm hoping if they do something, as they often do, in a tribute, a special to raise money, that I hope Bruce does something. I'd really love him here to. I'd love to hear the band do Cheeseburger in Paradise. I would love to hear Bruce do Come Monday.
Yeah.
And
I was debating with others, and it might have been on Twitter. You might have
yeah,
seen it. We lost Gordon Lightfoot
yeah,
earlier in the year, and he's got all these Canadian dates that were coming up that now aren't.
yeah,
And I even posted, okay, you cannot go to Canada in the wake of Gordon Lightfoot passing and not say something.
yeah, boy. In fact, boy, if I would have, and we could get in a whole nother discussion. I think Bruce needs a better PR group sometimes lately. But if I was them, I'd go, Bruce, if it hadn't been canceled, we've got to figure out a Gordon Lightfoot song. Because remember when we was in Australia a few years ago, he opened with a different Australian cover song
Right.
every show. So
Right.
yeah, it would be like, we need to do a Gordon Lightfoot, maybe a Tragically Hip song. That'd be nice.
Could you imagine Bruce doing Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald?
Oh, that would be awesome.
All of Canada would go insane, number one,
Yes.
as would I.
Yeah.
You can't even imagine.
My first musical obsession, Richard, was Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. I picked up a Endless Summer 8-track and just fell in love with it. And a few years ago, Brian was in New Jersey and Bruce joined him on stage for like fun or one other song. And I have said this only halfway kidding. If I had been in that auditorium and seen Bruce and Brian on stage together, forget watching my kid get married, watch having a grandson. That might have been the peak moment of my life. So I absolutely get you. All right. This has been so much fun. I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours, but I'm going to let you go. I end every podcast with the Mary question. Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher who's now retired, but when he was teaching, he would give the lyrics to Thunder Road to all his students. He did an honors English class, and they would break apart this poem, treating as a poem, and then would come through at the end of the session and would ask the class, does Mary get in the car? So, Richard, that is your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
It does not.
Okay.
Would you like to know why?
I absolutely would want to know why.
Because if Mary got in the car, we'd have a completely different song. If Mary
Okay.
gets in the car, the song is about the adventure with Mary in the car. It's not
Okay.
about the struggle to get her in the car.
Ah, I like that. I like that. That's a good answer. Very nice. All right. You've mentioned you're on Twitter a couple of times. If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
I am on Twitter. I am R.A. Harrison, PA on Twitter, now X.
Yes.
So yeah, any of your guests, your colleagues, your fans want to reach out and chat anytime. And I've had a great time talking to you. Happy to come back anytime and talk some more.
That sounds great. We're going to have to make that happen. Maybe after the next leg of tours, we'll have you back
Yeah,
on and
well,
talk.
yeah, I'm waiting for next week when supposedly we're getting new dates.
Yes, absolutely. I am too. All right. Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. Listeners, thank you for listening as always. I appreciate it. Let's end with, if we open up our hearts, love won't forsake us. Just let the music take us and carry us home. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, listeners. We'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.